Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood at attention as Commander Phillips delivered what he clearly thought was a punishment assignment. The other officers in the briefing room tried to hide their smirks, but Sarah could see them exchanging glances and barely containing their laughter. Gate duty. At Naval Base Norfolk, gate duty was where they sent people who had messed up, or in this case, where they sent someone they wanted to humiliate. Martinez, you'll be assigned to main gate security for the next 2 weeks, Commander Phillips announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of satisfaction that comes with delivering what he believed was a devastating blow to someone's career. Maybe some time checking IDs will give you a chance to reflect on your recent performance. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt the familiar burn of injustice. Her recent performance had been exemplary by any objective measure. She had completed every training exercise at the top of her class, exceeded all physical fitness requirements, and demonstrated tactical knowledge that impressed even the most seasoned instructors. But she was a woman in a boys' club, and some of the older officers seemed determined to remind her of that fact at every opportunity. The assignment to gate duty wasn't really about her performance at all. It was about the incident 3 weeks ago when she had corrected Commander Phillips during a tactical briefing. She had noticed a critical error in his assessment of a training scenario, one that could have resulted in casualties if it had been a real operation. When she respectfully pointed out the mistake, providing the correct intelligence data to support her position, Phillips had turned red-faced with embarrassment in front of the entire room. Since then, he had been looking for ways to put her in her place. Gate duty was his solution, a way to publicly demonstrate that brilliant tactical minds and superior performance meant nothing if you didn't know when to keep your mouth shut and let the men handle the thinking. As the briefing ended and the other officers filed out, several of them made sure to walk past Sarah with barely whispered comments. "Enjoy checking IDs, Martinez. Maybe you'll learn some respect out there." 2 weeks of gate duty should cool down that attitude. Sarah gathered her materials and headed to her quarters to change into the appropriate uniform for gate security. The quarters she had been assigned were smaller than those given to her male counterparts of the same rank, located in a building that seemed to have been forgotten by the maintenance crew. The heating barely worked in winter, and the air conditioning failed regularly in summer. It was another small reminder that she was not entirely welcome here, despite her qualifications and dedication. As she changed uniforms, Sarah allowed herself a moment to feel the frustration and anger that she normally kept buried beneath her professional demeanor. She had joined the Navy with dreams of serving her country and proving that women could excel in any role they were given the opportunity to fill. Instead, she often felt like she was fighting 2 battles, one against external enemies and another against the prejudices of her own colleagues. But Sarah had not gotten to where she was by giving up when things became difficult. She came from a family of fighters, people who had overcome obstacles through determination and hard work rather than complaint and self-pity. Her grandmother had worked in factories during World War II when the men were overseas fighting. Her mother had been one of the first female police officers in their hometown, facing discrimination and harassment that made Sarah's current situation seem mild by comparison. The walk to the main gate took her across the base, past buildings where she knew important strategic planning was taking place, past training facilities where she should have been honing skills that could save lives in combat situations. Instead, she was heading to a guard shack where she would spend her days checking identification cards and vehicle passes, a job that could have been performed by someone with a fraction of her training and education. The main gate at Naval Base Norfolk was a busy place, with hundreds of vehicles and personnel passing through every day. Military personnel, civilian contractors, delivery trucks, and official visitors all had to be processed through the security checkpoint. It was important work in its own way, but it was also routine work that did not require the skills Sarah had spent years developing. Sergeant Mike Reeves was waiting for her at the gate when she arrived. Mike was a career enlisted man who had been working security for more than 15 years. He had seen plenty of officers come and go on gate duty assignments, and he could usually tell within the first few minutes what kind of person he would be working with. "You must be Lieutenant Martinez," Mike said, offering her a handshake and a professional smile. "I heard you'd be joining us for a couple of weeks. I'm Sergeant Reeves, but most folks just call me Mike." Sarah appreciated his straightforward manner and the fact that he did not seem to be treating her assignment as either a joke or a punishment. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'm looking forward to working with you. I know this isn't exactly standard for someone with my background, but I'm here to do whatever job needs doing." Mike nodded approvingly. In his experience, the officers who came to gate duty fell into two categories: those who complained constantly about being there and made everyone around them miserable, and those who recognized that every job in the military served a purpose and approached even temporary assignments with professionalism. Lieutenant Martinez clearly fell into the second category. Gate security is more complex than most people realize, Mike explained as he began showing Sarah around the facility. We're not just checking IDs. We're the first line of defense for everything that happens on this base. Every person who comes through that gate, every vehicle, every package or delivery, has to be evaluated for potential security risks. A good gate guard develops instincts about what looks right and what doesn't. Sarah found herself genuinely interested as Mike walked her through the various procedures and protocols. There were different types of identification to verify, different clearance levels to understand, different procedures for different categories of visitors. Vehicle inspections required knowledge of what to look for in terms of hidden compartments or suspicious modifications. Even something as simple as checking a delivery truck required understanding of shipping manifests, authorized suppliers, and timing patterns. The thing about gate duty, Mike continued, is that it gives you a unique perspective on the whole operation of the base. You see patterns that other people miss. You notice when someone who usually comes through at a certain time starts showing up at different times, or when their behavior seems different from normal. You become familiar with the routines and can spot when something is off. As they worked through the first day together, Sarah began to understand what Mike meant. There was a rhythm to the gate operations, patterns of traffic and activity that reflected the larger operations of the base. Morning rush as personnel reported for duty, midday deliveries and official visitors, afternoon training exercises that affected who was coming and going, evening departures as day shifts ended. But there were also anomalies and irregularities that required attention and judgment. A contractor who seemed nervous when presenting identification. A delivery truck that arrived outside normal hours without proper notification. A visitor whose story about why they were there did not quite match the official request on file. Mike had been right about developing instincts. After just a few days, Sarah found herself noticing details that would have escaped her attention when she first arrived. The way someone approached the gate, their body language when presenting identification, inconsistencies in paperwork or explanations that might indicate problems. She also began to notice patterns in the personnel who passed through the gate regularly. There were the administrative staff who arrived precisely on schedule every morning, the maintenance crews who came and went at irregular hours depending on what work needed to be done, the training instructors, whose schedules varied based on exercise requirements. And then there were the special operations personnel. They were easy to identify once you knew what to look for, even when they were not in uniform. There was something about their bearing, their alertness, the way they moved that set them apart from regular military personnel. They tended to arrive at unusual hours, often in unmarked vehicles, and their identification indicated clearance levels that were higher than standard. Sarah had always been interested in special operations, though she knew that many of those roles were still not officially open to women. She had studied special tactics and unconventional warfare as part of her officer training, and she understood the critical importance of units like the Navy SEALs in modern military operations. Sometimes she would see them preparing for training exercises or returning from operations, and she could not help but wonder what it would be like to be part of such elite units. The physical demands were extreme, but she knew she could meet them. The mental challenges were intense, but her tactical knowledge and problem-solving abilities had always been among her strongest attributes. But those opportunities remained largely theoretical for women in the military, at least in official capacities. Sarah had heard rumors that women were sometimes involved in special operations in unofficial or classified roles, but if such things were happening, they were not discussed openly. As her first week on gate duty came to an end, Sarah had settled into the routine and found herself actually enjoying certain aspects of the work. There was satisfaction in being part of the base's security, in knowing that her attention to detail and developing instincts contributed to keeping everyone safe. Mike had become not just a colleague, but something of a mentor, sharing insights gained from years of experience in security operations. But she also felt the weight of wasted potential, the knowledge that while she was checking identification cards, Other officers with less training and ability were being given opportunities to contribute to important strategic operations. The assignment was still a punishment, regardless of how she chose to approach it or what she might learn from it. That perspective was about to change dramatically, though. Sarah had no way of knowing it as she prepared for her second week of gate duty. The routine that she had begun to master was about to be disrupted by events that would transform her understanding of her current assignment and her entire military career. The base had been busier than usual as the new week began, with increased traffic suggesting that some kind of operation or exercise was being planned. Sarah had noticed more special operations personnel coming through the gate, along with civilian contractors whose identification indicated they worked for defense companies specializing in advanced tactical equipment. On Tuesday morning of her second week, as Sarah was processing the usual flow of morning traffic, Mike received a radio call that made him straighten up and adopt a more formal posture. "Roger that, we'll be ready," he responded, then turned to Sarah with an expression that was more serious than she had seen from him before. "We've got some VIPs coming through this morning," he explained. "High-level visitors for some kind of briefing or meeting. The word is to be especially sharp on security protocols and to treat these folks with appropriate respect for their rank and position." Sarah nodded her understanding, but privately wondered why such visitors would be coming through the main gate rather than being escorted directly to wherever they needed to go. In her experience, truly important military visitors usually bypassed standard entry procedures entirely. Her question was answered about 30 minutes later when an unmarked black sedan approached the gate. The vehicle had government plates but no other identifying features, and the windows were tinted dark enough that she could not see who was inside. As it pulled up to the checkpoint, the driver's window rolled down to reveal a man in civilian clothes who presented military identification indicating a rank that made Sarah's eyes widen slightly. The passenger door opened, and a man stepped out who immediately commanded attention even though he was also dressed in civilian clothes rather than uniform. He was not particularly large or imposing physically, but there was something about his presence that suggested he was accustomed to command and respect. His identification confirmed what Sarah had already begun to suspect. This was someone very high up in the special operations community. As Sarah processed their paperwork and verified their authorization to enter the base, she found herself wondering what kind of operation or planning session would bring such high-ranking officers to Norfolk. Whatever was happening, it was clearly significant, and she felt a familiar pang of frustration at being excluded from the kind of work that she knew she was qualified to contribute to. The VIP visitors were processed quickly and professionally, but as their vehicle prepared to drive onto the base, something unexpected happened. The rear passenger window rolled down, and a face appeared that Sarah recognized immediately, though she tried to keep her reaction from showing. Admiral James Harrison was a legend in the special operations community, a man whose career included some of the most classified and successful missions in recent military history. Sarah had studied his tactics and leadership during her officer training, and she knew that his presence at Norfolk meant something very significant was in development. What she did not expect was for Admiral Harrison to look directly at her, study her face for a moment with eyes that seemed to see more than most people's, and then speak a single word that changed everything: Nightingale. The word hung in the air like a lightning strike, and Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Nightingale, a call sign she had not heard spoken aloud in over 3 years, a name from a part of her life that was supposed to be buried so deep that it might as well have never existed. Her hands, which had been steady in professional moments before, began to tremble slightly as she processed what had just happened. Mike Reeves noticed the change in her immediately. In his 15 years of gate duty, he had never seen Lieutenant Martinez show any sign of being rattled or uncertain. She had been the epitome of calm professionalism since arriving at his post. But now she looked like she had seen a ghost, or perhaps like a ghost had just seen her. Admiral Harrison's window rolled back up, and the black sedan drove onto the base, leaving Sarah standing at the gate with her mind racing and her carefully maintained composure threatening to crack. Mike approached her with concern evident in his expression. "Lieutenant, are you okay? You look like you've just been hit by a truck." Sarah realized she needed to pull herself together quickly. Whatever game was being played here, whatever reason Admiral Harrison had for speaking that particular word, she could not afford to fall apart in front of witnesses. She had spent 3 years building a new identity, a new career, a new life. She could not let it crumble because someone from her past had decided to surface. "I'm fine, Sergeant," she managed to say, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. "Just felt a little dizzy for a moment. Maybe I didn't eat enough breakfast this morning." Mike was not entirely convinced, but he had been in the military long enough to recognize when someone did not want to discuss what was really bothering them. "Why don't you take a few minutes in the guard shack? Get some water and sit down for a bit. I can handle the gate solo for a while." Sarah gratefully accepted the suggestion and made her way into the small building that served as the gate's administrative center. She sat down heavily in one of the chairs and tried to process what had just happened. How did Admiral Harrison know her call sign? More importantly, how did he know to connect that call sign with Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, a naval officer whose official record contained no reference to any special operations training or experience? The answer, she knew, lay in a classified operation that had taken place 4 years ago, before she had even joined the Navy officially. She had been recruited while still in college by a program that did not officially exist, trained in skills that were not supposed to be taught to women, and deployed on missions that were never acknowledged by any government agency. Operation Nightingale had been the brainchild of a small group of forward-thinking military planners who recognized that certain types of missions required operatives who could blend into environments where traditional Special Forces personnel would stand out. Women, they realized, could access targets and gather intelligence in ways that male operatives simply could not. The program was highly classified and completely unofficial. The women who were recruited were given intensive training in combat, intelligence gathering, infiltration, and extraction techniques. They were taught to kill silently and efficiently, to disappear into crowds, to extract information from targets who never realized they were being manipulated. Sarah had been recruited during her junior year of college, identified by talent scouts who had been monitoring student records for individuals with the right combination of intelligence, physical capability, and psychological profile. The recruitment process had been subtle, gradual, disguised as internship opportunities and academic research projects. The training had been the most intense experience of her life. For 8 months, she had lived in facilities that did not appear on any official maps, working with instructors whose names she never learned and whose backgrounds remained mysterious. She had been pushed beyond every limit she thought she had, forced to develop skills and instincts that seemed impossible for someone of her background and experience. The other women in the program came from diverse backgrounds, but they all shared certain characteristics: exceptional intelligence, outstanding physical fitness, and a particular type of mental toughness that allowed them to function effectively in high-stress situations. They had been given call signs instead of names during training, and Sarah had become Nightingale. After completing the training, she had been deployed on 3 missions over the course of 2 years. Each mission had been different from the others, requiring different skills and approaches, but all had been successful in achieving their objectives. Sarah had proven herself capable of infiltrating target locations, gathering critical intelligence, and extracting herself safely from hostile environments. But then, the program had been shut down. Political changes, budget constraints, and concerns about the legal and ethical implications of using female operatives in roles that were not officially acknowledged had led to the decision to terminate Operation Nightingale. The women who had participated were debriefed extensively, sworn to secrecy, and given new identities and career paths that would distance them from their special operations experience. Sarah had chosen to pursue a conventional military career, using the leadership and tactical skills she had developed during her time in the program to excel as a regular naval officer. The official records of her education and training made no mention of Operation Nightingale or the missions she had completed. As far as anyone knew, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was simply a dedicated and talented officer who had risen through the ranks through hard work and natural ability. For 3 years, that fiction had been maintained perfectly. Sarah had buried her past so deeply that there were times when she almost believed the official version of her own story herself. She had focused on building a legitimate military career, proving herself through conventional channels, earning respect and advancement through documented achievements. But now Admiral Harrison had shattered that carefully constructed facade with a single word, and Sarah knew that her past was about to collide with her present in ways that could destroy everything she had worked to build. As she sat in the guard shack trying to regain her composure, Sarah's mind raced through the possible implications of what had just happened. Why had Admiral Harrison chosen to reveal his knowledge of her identity at this particular moment? What did he want from her? And most importantly, what did this mean for her future in the Navy? She was still wrestling with these questions when Mike stuck his head into the guard shack. "Lieutenant, there's a call for you. Someone wants to speak with you immediately." Then it started to say something different before the contest. The passage was so unsettled that it probably couldn't have happened. Then it became a very small, broad entity. But she had no choice except to take the call and face whatever consequences were coming. The voice on the other end of the line was crisp, professional, and unfamiliar. "Lieutenant Martinez, this is Commander Johnson from Base Security. You are to report immediately to Building 47, Room 203. Come alone and do not discuss this call with anyone." Building 47 was in a section of the base that Sarah had never had reason to visit, an area that housed various administrative and intelligence functions. Room 203 was not a designation that meant anything to her, but the tone of the caller's voice made it clear that this was not a request but an order. Sarah told Mike that she had been called away on urgent business and might not be back for the rest of her shift. Mike looked concerned but did not ask questions, understanding that sometimes military personnel were summoned to meetings that could not be explained or discussed. The walk to Building 47 gave Sarah time to prepare herself mentally for whatever was waiting. She had been through enough briefings and debriefings during her time in Operation Nightingale to know how to maintain her composure under interrogation. But she also knew that she was walking into a situation where the rules were unclear, and the stakes were potentially very high. Building 47 was a nondescript concrete structure that could have been housing anything from supply logistics to accounting offices. There were no signs or indicators that suggested what functions were actually performed inside. Sarah found room 203 on the second floor at the end of a hallway that seemed longer than it actually was. She knocked on the door and was told to enter. The room was small and sparsely furnished, containing only a table, 2 chairs, and a man in civilian clothes who stood up as she entered. He was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and the kind of quietly intense presence that Sarah associated with intelligence professionals. "Lieutenant Martinez, please have a seat. I'm David Stevens from Naval Intelligence. We need to have a conversation about your background and your current assignment." Sarah sat down and waited for Stevens to continue, maintaining the neutral expression and posture that had been drilled into her during her special operations training. She would answer questions when asked, but would not volunteer information unnecessarily. "4 years ago," Stevens began, "you participated in a classified program that officially never existed. That program produced operatives with unique skills and experience that are occasionally still needed for special situations. Your current assignment to gate duty was not actually a punishment, Lieutenant. It was a cover assignment designed to place you in a position where your special background could be utilized if necessary." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that her assignment to gate duty had not been the result of Commander Phillips's petty revenge, but apprehension about what kind of situation might require the reactivation of someone from Operation Nightingale. "There is currently a situation developing that requires someone with your particular skill set and background," Stevens continued. "We need an operative who can blend into civilian environments, who has experience with infiltration and intelligence gathering, and who can function independently in hostile territory. Your official naval record provides perfect cover for the type of mission we have in mind."
"What type of mission?" Sarah asked, speaking for the first time since entering the room.
Stevens leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment before answering. "There is a terrorist organization that has been planning attacks against U.S. military installations. We have identified their leadership and their general operating area, but we need someone who can get close enough to gather detailed intelligence about their plans and capabilities. Someone who can pose as a civilian contractor or aid worker. Someone who won't trigger the suspicions that a male operative might generate." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that she had not experienced since her last Operation Nightingale mission. The prospect of returning to that kind of work was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent 3 years building a conventional military career, and part of her had hoped that she would never be called upon to use her special operations skills again. But another part of her, a part that she had tried to suppress, missed the intensity and importance of that kind of work. Regular naval duties, even at their most challenging, did not provide the same sense of purpose and accomplishment that came from successfully completing a mission that could save lives and protect national security. "This is completely voluntary," Stevens added, reading her expression. "If you choose not to accept this assignment, your current naval career will continue without any negative consequences. Your cover assignment will be explained as a temporary security rotation, and you can return to regular duties with no one being the wiser about this conversation. And, if I accept, you will be temporarily detached from regular naval duties under a classified cover story. You will receive updated training and briefing on the specific mission requirements. The mission itself is expected to last approximately 6 weeks, after which you will return to your naval career with a commendation for outstanding performance in a classified assignment." Sarah knew that she was at a crossroads that would define the rest of her military career and possibly her life. She could choose the safe path, returning to conventional naval service and continuing to build the legitimate career she had worked so hard to establish, or she could step back into the shadow world of special operations, accepting the risks and challenges that came with that choice. The decision should have been difficult, but Sarah realized that she had already made it the moment Stevens had started explaining the situation. The skills she had learned during Operation Nightingale were not just professional capabilities. They were part of who she was as a person. She had been trained for exactly this type of mission, and there were probably very few people in the world who could accomplish what needed to be done. "I accept the assignment," she said simply. Stevens nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Admiral Harrison thought you would. He requested specifically that you be approached for this mission. He said that Nightingale was the best operative he had ever worked with, and that if anyone could accomplish this objective, it would be you." The mention of Admiral Harrison's confidence in her abilities filled Sarah with a sense of validation that she had not felt since leaving the special operations world. During her time in conventional naval service, she had often felt that her true capabilities were unrecognized and unutilized. Now she was being called upon to use every skill she had ever developed in service of a mission that could have significant impact on national security. "When do I start?" she asked. "Immediately. You will be officially transferred to a classified assignment effective tomorrow morning. Commander Phillips will be told that you have been selected for a special training program which will explain your absence from regular duties. Report to this building at 0600 tomorrow for your initial briefing and preparation." As Sarah left Building 47 and walked back across the base, she felt like she was stepping out of one life and into another. The past 3 years of conventional military service had been important for her development as an officer and as a person, but they had also been a kind of holding pattern, a time of waiting for something that she had not even realized she was waiting for. Now that waiting was over, and Nightingale was being called back into action. The briefing room in Building 47 looked completely different at 6 in the morning than it had the previous afternoon. Banks of computer monitors had been wheeled in overnight, along with maps, satellite imagery, and communication equipment that suggested this was now functioning as a temporary command center. Admiral Harrison was present, along with Stevens and 2 other men whom Sarah did not recognize, but whose bearing suggested they were senior intelligence officials. "Nightingale," Admiral Harrison said as she entered the room, using her call sign with the same natural ease he might use someone's regular name. "Thank you for accepting this assignment. The situation we're facing requires exactly the kind of capabilities that made you so successful during your original program." Sarah took a seat at the briefing table and waited for the full explanation of what she was being asked to do. The mission details as they were presented were more complex and dangerous than Stevens had initially indicated, but they also represented exactly the kind of challenge that her training had prepared her for. The terrorist organization, known as the Crimson Dawn Network, had been operating in Eastern Europe for the past 2 years, gradually building capabilities and recruiting operatives for what intelligence analysts believed was a major attack against NATO military installations. The group was led by a former military officer named Viktor Kozlov, who had been dismissed from the Russian Special Forces for unauthorized operations and had subsequently disappeared into the underground world of international terrorism. Kozlov had proven to be exceptionally skilled at avoiding detection and infiltration by traditional intelligence operatives. He surrounded himself with a core group of trusted associates who had known him for years, and he operated in regions where Western male operatives would stand out immediately. Several attempts to penetrate his organization had failed, with 2 agents being identified and killed before they could gather any useful intelligence. The key to reaching Kozlov, Admiral Harrison explained, is through his operational network, rather than trying to approach him directly. Our intelligence indicates that he recruits operatives through a series of legitimate-seeming front organizations, including humanitarian aid groups operating in refugee camps and disaster relief zones. Sarah studied the satellite imagery and personnel files that were spread across the table. The scope of the operation was impressive in its complexity, with cells operating in multiple countries and coordination that suggested significant resources and planning capabilities. Your mission, Stevens continued, will be to infiltrate one of these front organizations and work your way into the operational network. Once inside, you will need to identify key personnel, gather intelligence about planned operations, and ultimately locate Kozlov himself so that he can be eliminated or captured. The cover story that had been developed for Sarah was both simple and sophisticated. She would be Dr. Burke's Sarah Collins, a medical professional with experience in emergency medicine and disaster relief. Her background would indicate previous work with various humanitarian organizations, and she would be applying to join a medical aid group that intelligence analysis suggested was being used by the Crimson Dawn Network as a recruiting ground. The beauty of this cover, Admiral Harrison noted, is that your actual naval medical training provides a legitimate foundation for the identity. You won't be pretending to have skills you don't possess. You'll simply be using those skills in a different context. The preparation phase of the mission would last 2 weeks, during which Sarah would receive updated training in the latest surveillance and communication technologies, refresh her language skills in Russian and German, and develop the specific medical credentials needed for her cover identity. She would also undergo intensive briefings on the political and social dynamics of the regions where she would be operating. During those 2 weeks, Sarah found herself slipping back into the mindset and operational patterns that had defined her life during Operation Nightingale. The skills came back more easily than she had expected. Muscle memory and mental reflexes that had been dormant but not lost. The physical training was demanding, but she had maintained her fitness during her naval service, and the specialized combat techniques returned with surprising fluidity. The psychological preparation was more challenging. Living under deep cover required a kind of mental compartmentalization that was difficult to maintain over extended periods. Sarah would have to become Dr. Sarah Collins so completely that she could pass any casual scrutiny, while simultaneously maintaining her operational awareness and mission focus as Nightingale. The most dangerous part of this type of operation, her psychology briefer explained, is not the physical risks, though those are significant. It's the risk of losing yourself in the cover identity, or conversely, of having the cover identity compromised because you can't maintain it consistently under pressure. Sarah understood the warning, but she also felt confident in her ability to handle the psychological demands of the mission. During her previous operations, she had demonstrated remarkable skill at maintaining cover identities even under extreme stress, and she had always been able to separate her operational persona from her true self. The technological aspects of the mission were more advanced than anything she had worked with during Operation Nightingale. The communication devices were smaller and more sophisticated, capable of transmitting coded messages through civilian cell phone networks without detection. The surveillance equipment had been miniaturized to the point where cameras and recording devices could be concealed in everyday items without any visible signs of modification. The key to using this equipment effectively, her technical briefer explained, is to remember that your primary mission is intelligence gathering, not direct action. These tools are designed to help you collect information and communicate with your handlers, not to engage in combat operations. Sarah's language training focused on achieving native-level fluency in the regional dialects she would encounter, along with the specialized vocabulary related to medical aid work and humanitarian operations. She already had conversational ability in Russian from her original training, but she needed to be able to discuss medical procedures and emergency treatment protocols with the fluency of someone who had spent years working in the field. The most intensive part of her preparation involved developing her medical credentials and knowledge base. While her naval medical training provided a solid foundation, she needed to be able to function convincingly as a civilian doctor with experience in trauma medicine and epidemic disease control. This required not just memorizing information, but developing the kind of intuitive understanding that comes from years of practical experience. Your cover story includes deployment to several disaster zones over the past 5 years, her medical briefer explained. You need to be able to discuss specific cases and challenges from those deployments as if you had actually lived through them. The people you'll be working with are genuine medical professionals, and they'll notice immediately if your knowledge seems theoretical rather than practical. As her preparation phase neared completion, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and apprehension that preceded deployment on a dangerous mission. She had confidence in her training and abilities, but she also understood that she was about to enter a situation where the margin for error was essentially zero. If her cover was blown, or if she made a critical mistake in gathering intelligence, the consequences could be fatal not just for her, but for the innocent people who might be killed in the terrorist attack she was trying to prevent. The final briefing took place in the same room where her mission had been explained 2 weeks earlier, but now the walls were covered with detailed maps and organizational charts showing everything intelligence agencies had been able to learn about the Crimson Dawn network. Admiral Harrison conducted the briefing personally, a sign of how important this mission was considered to be. "Your insertion point will be Prague," he began, indicating a location on the map. "Dr. Sarah Collins will be arriving to join the International Medical Relief Organization, which is preparing to deploy teams to refugee camps in the Balkans. Our intelligence indicates that Kozlov's people have been recruiting from this organization for the past 6 months. The IMRO, as it was known, was a legitimate humanitarian organization that had been unwittingly infiltrated by Crimson Dawn operatives. The terrorist network was using the organization's operations as cover for moving personnel and equipment, while also identifying potential recruits among the aid workers and medical professionals. Your primary objective is to identify the Crimson Dawn operatives within the organization and trace their connections back to the leadership structure. We need to know who Kozlov's key lieutenants are, where they're based, and what their operational timeline looks like." Sarah studied the personnel files for the IMRO staff members who were known to be legitimate aid workers. These people would be her colleagues and potentially her friends over the coming weeks, and she needed to be able to interact with them naturally while secretly investigating their organization for signs of terrorist infiltration. "Your secondary objective," Admiral Harrison continued, "is to gather intelligence about the specific targets and methods that Crimson Dawn is planning to use in their attacks. We know they're planning something significant, but we don't know what, where, or when." The communication protocols for the mission were more complex than those Sarah had used during her previous operations. She would have multiple handler contacts, different methods for different types of intelligence, and emergency procedures that could be used if her cover was compromised or if she discovered information that required immediate action. "Remember," Stevens added during the final technical briefing, "your primary protection is your cover identity. As long as Dr. Sarah Collins remains above suspicion, you can continue gathering intelligence indefinitely. But if that cover is blown, you become extremely vulnerable, and extraction may not be possible." Sarah's extraction plan was necessarily limited and contingent. If the mission proceeded normally, she would complete her assignment with the IRO and return to the United States through normal civilian channels. But if something went wrong, if her cover was compromised, or if she discovered information that required immediate action, there were emergency procedures that could be activated. "The reality," Admiral Harrison explained, "is that if you get into serious trouble in the operational area, our ability to help you will be extremely limited. This mission requires complete deniability, which means that officially, Dr. Sid McMost, Sarah Collins is a civilian aid worker with no connection to U.S. intelligence or military operations." The final preparations for deployment involved transforming Sarah's appearance and mannerisms to match her cover identity completely. Her hair was cut and colored to match Dr. Preisler.
Is this solid, ISO?
Collins's passport photo, and she practiced the slightly different posture and speech patterns that would distinguish her civilian persona from her military bearing. Her personal belongings were replaced entirely with items that Dr. Collins would own: civilian clothes appropriate for medical aid work, personal effects that supported her cover story, and professional materials that demonstrated her supposed experience in disaster relief medicine. Even her luggage and accessories were selected to be consistent with the image of a dedicated humanitarian worker. On her last evening before deployment, Sarah had dinner with Admiral Harrison in a private dining room at the base. It was an unusual gesture, but one that underscored the importance of the mission and the personal interest he had taken in her success. "Operation Nightingale produced some exceptional operatives," he told her over dinner, "but you were always something special. You had not just the technical skills and physical capabilities, but the intellectual flexibility and psychological resilience that made you effective in situations where others might have failed. Sarah felt honored by his confidence, but she also understood the weight of responsibility that came with it. This mission had the potential to prevent terrorist attacks that could kill hundreds or thousands of innocent people. The intelligence she gathered could lead to the disruption of an entire terrorist network and the capture or elimination of some very dangerous individuals. The thing that made you Nightingale, Admiral Harrison continued, was not just your ability to complete missions, but your ability to adapt to changing circumstances and find solutions that others might not have considered. That flexibility is going to be crucial for this operation, because we can't predict everything you might encounter once you're in the field. As Sarah prepared for sleep on her last night before deployment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she had been trying to build a conventional military career, convinced that her special operations background was a closed chapter in her life. 2 weeks ago, she had been suffering through what she thought was a punishment assignment at the base gate. Now she was about to deploy on one of the most important and dangerous missions of her career, using skills and experience that made her uniquely qualified for this particular challenge. Tomorrow, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez would disappear into a classified assignment, and Dr. Sarah Collins would board a flight to Prague to begin her work with the International Medical Relief Organization. The transformation would be complete, and Nightingale would be operational once again in service of a mission that could affect the safety and security of countless innocent people. The stakes could not have been higher, but Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had been trained for exactly this type of operation, and she was determined to prove that Admiral Harrison's confidence in her abilities was justified.